Israeli forces shoot hundreds of Palestinians during Land Day protests as the two-state solution peace process dies. Are frustrations rising? Can a Jewish majority in Israel be maintained if Palestinian refugees are ever allowed to return to their land? This is Inside Story. I'm Sami Zeidan. Hello and welcome to the show. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for an independent investigation into the deaths of 17 Palestinians shot by Israeli forces during a protest in Gaza. More than 1,400 protesters were injured. Half of them were hit by Israeli gunfire. The protesters were marking Land Day, the day in 1976 when 2,000 hectares of land was confiscated from Palestinian citizens of Israel. 6 people died in subsequent protests back then. In a moment, we'll look more closely at the Palestinian land question. But first, Huda Abdelhamid reports on Friday's events in Gaza.
It was supposed to be a peaceful day, but as unarmed protesters marched towards the border fence, Israeli soldiers opened fire. Sharpshooters were deployed. But Palestinians, frustrated by the endless siege they live under, were undeterred. Israeli commanders say they issued warnings against approaching the border fence.
We will never shoot one bullet against anyone who stays away from the security wall. We have warned during the last few days that everyone who tries to violate the Israeli sovereignty or to infiltrate the Israeli territories will put himself and his life in danger.
But for besieged Palestinians, demonstrating next to the border is about the only visible means available for the world not to forget their plight.
We live under immense pressure. That is why the people explode. The blockade and the siege led to the explosion. We either choose to live properly or to die. We have no space. We have no alternatives but to explode. We have nothing except the oxygen in the air.
Land Day is considered the first Palestinian popular uprising. For the past 42 years, Palestinians have been commemorating this day. But this year, after Trump's declaration over Jerusalem, it has taken greater significance. It all started here in northern Israel, after thousands of hectares of land were confiscated from Palestinians back in 1976. 6 Palestinians were killed then. Yara Mohammed says nothing has changed since. Palestinian land is still being taken away, now more than ever.
We came to commemorate this day because we have to confront the state. It's important to remember our martyrs, and it's important to save our ownership of the land. I personally think we should resist until our last breath. We shouldn't negotiate anymore. We shouldn't give up our rights. We need to find new ways.
Many of the people living in Gaza today are refugees, and they're demanding their right to return home. Several tents have been erected a little further away from the border fence for what is being called the Great March of Return. People are vowing to stay here until May 15th. By then, the U.S. is due to have moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Huda Abdelhamid, Al Jazeera in northern Israel.
Well, let's take a closer look at what many see as a never-ending Israeli land grab. Last month alone, approval was given for the construction of more than 1,000 settlement homes in the occupied West Bank. Nearly 7,000 settlement homes were approved last year, the highest number in 4 years. There are now 600,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Building permits for Palestinians, however, are difficult to obtain. Some of their homes are at constant risk of demolition. One Palestinian research group estimates that more than 5,000 homes have been demolished in Jerusalem alone since 1967. At least 5 million Palestinians remain displaced, scattered in camps within the Palestinian territory, as well as in Jordan, Lebanon and Syria. Let's bring in our panel now. We have joining us from West Jerusalem, Robbie Sabel, law professor at Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a former legal advisor in the Israeli Foreign Ministry. From Ramallah, Issam Aruri, director at the Jerusalem Legal Aid and Human Rights Center, And from Chicago, Ali Abu Ni'ama, the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada, an independent online news publication focusing on Palestine. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Ali in Chicago. So although, of course, the struggle for land has been the sort of key central theme to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, are tensions rising now and heating up more than ever before?
Well, I mean, we've just seen Israeli snipers carry out a premeditated massacre of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who are marching for their right to return to land from which they were ethnically cleansed just because they're not Jewish. I think this really, the bloody events on Friday, Israel turned Good Friday into Bloody Friday, show us that land remains at the heart of this situation.
Ali, as I'm sure you know, forgive me for interrupting, but I'm sure Israel and its supporters would argue that they're there to simply prevent Palestinians from spilling over from the Gaza side of the border and creating problems in Israel.
Hold on a second. Not everything is two sides, balance this, balance that. Let's look at what happened yesterday in Gaza. Not a single Israeli soldier was injured or killed. Not a single Israeli was harmed. We have all seen the footage on the news and on the internet of snipers shooting Palestinians hundreds of meters away from the border fence. And I'm not going to engage in this on the one hand, this, on the other hand, that nonsense.
So let me take the question to Issam then. Is the demise of the peace process leaving Palestinians losing hope in a peaceful restoration of their rights? Are issues like that playing in the Palestinian psyche right now when it comes to hopes and aspirations to be able to get back to their land?
Yes, if I want to talk about one major threat to the whole peace, the whole settlement in this area, part of the world, is settlement expansion. Since the peace process was started in mid-90s or maybe even early 90s, the settlements, the settlers' numbers in the Palestinian occupied territory doubled 6 times, a growth of 600%. It is unprecedented. It shows that the Israeli will is not going towards peace with Palestinians, towards a two-state solution, rather than grabbing more land and bringing its own population to the occupied territory in violation of international humanitarian law. That's a war crime, and Israel should be accountable for that. The whole thing is about...
But those are trends which have been going on for a while. Are we seeing a step up in the sort of measures or trends which basically make it difficult for Palestinians to restore their land rights?
Yes, it's becoming more and more difficult. The Israeli
like what? Give me some examples, Issam.
Declared the Israeli Bureau of Statistics declared in June 2017 that the previous year witnessed an increase of 70% of actual building in settlements in all over the West Bank. It shows that this is the priority to Israel. The regulations and the laws that Israel drafted or passed through this year, the last of it was the nationality law, which prevents even Palestinians in Israel to live in almost 920 townships in Israel, and allowing legally for the first time to establish a Jewish-only towns and villages. This is a movement from de facto apartheid to de jure apartheid. It's becoming legal. It's becoming official policy. And the regulations, all the regulations in the West Bank, the regularization law that allows the government to legalize illegal building of settlements over on Palestinian private land, it is unprecedented. it's official thefting of land and resources.
All right, let me take some of those points then to Robbie. I mean, the general tone there is that Israel has been stepping up measures that deny Palestinians their rights, especially when it comes to land.
There's three issues I'd like to take. First of all, the Gaza Strip. This was not a peaceful demonstration. It was organized by Hamas, an organization which claims that the whole of Palestine is an Arab Muslim area and there's no room for Israel.
But hang on,
And
Robbie, to Ali's point, he did point out we didn't see any Israeli soldiers being shot at. No, just to be fair, I might also interrupt you, so go ahead now.
Okay, no Israelis were injured because they were lying on the ground. The Hamas used violence. They threw firebombs. They even used firearms. And by the way, I think their own admission that just a moment, please. 5 men. Please. That's interesting.
It's 2018.
Thank you.
In 2017, according to the World Health Organization, 54 Palestinians died in Gaza because Israel wouldn't give them medical.
I'm sorry. Can I make the point?
People were protesting because you.
Ali, let me give Robbie a chance to finish the thought, and I promise I'll come back to you, Ali, for if you want to comment on that. Go ahead, Robbie.
According to the official Hamas declaration, of the 16 people they claim were died, 5 were members of their military wing. I'm quoting an official Hamas declaration today. This was not a peaceful demonstration. It was instigated by Hamas to create violence. And please, I'm not being allowed to make my points. This is not fair.
Okay, sorry.
On the second
Ali,
point, on the
all right, can we move to your
issue,
second and third point? Then we'll come to Ali for him. Hang on, Ali, for a minute.
The second
go
point
ahead,
is 90% of the Palestinians in the West Bank live under the Palestinian Authority. There's no Israeli settlements there. There's no Israeli law. They're living under the Palestinian Authority. On the remaining issue of the B area, we have to negotiate. And I haven't heard a single word from either of the speakers that this is an issue that we have to negotiate.
All right. Okay, you've made your 3 points, Robbie, but I think we should bear in mind the Palestinian Authority, there isn't a Palestinian state. And by most people's understanding, Palestinians do continue in the West Bank to live under Israeli occupation. Anyway, let's not get bogged down perhaps into too much.
Sorry.
All right.
Third point is they declare themselves to be a state. They have their own police, administration, courts, and even militia. They run their own affairs. But we have to negotiate a border between us. And this is the point. I'm trying to hear from one of the Palestinians. They'll sit with us and negotiate. Instead of
if you're dying to hear from one,
the whole of Palestine is an Arab state.
Let's hear from one right now. Ali, go ahead, because I know you had something that you wanted us to hear.
Well, it's funny to hear the Israeli representative talking about Palestinians having a state. Israel doesn't recognize a Palestinian state. It doesn't recognize the Palestinian Authority as having any sovereignty. For example, when Israeli settlers murder Palestinians or destroy their property, Palestinian Authority police aren't allowed to arrest them. And, it's astonishing to hear this representative of the settler state calling for negotiations. What is there to negotiate? How can you negotiate with somebody who's busy stealing your land? It's the old analogy I always use, that if we're negotiating not over land, but over a pizza, and I start gobbling it as fast as I can, what kind of negotiations can there be? Israel doesn't want negotiations. This old talking point of, oh, we just want peace and we just want the Palestinians to come and negotiate with us is rubbish for international media consumption. What Israel is doing is conquering the land.
Rubbish
not just in the West Bank, not just in the West Bank.
You do not recognize. Rubbish is that you do not recognize the right of the Jewish people to have a state.
Okay, all right.
How can I recognize a state?
This is the issue.
That has no
Hamas does not recognize.
Robbie, I will give you a chance in a minute, Robbie, but let Ali finish his thought now, so we can have some kind of discussion. Bear with me, Robbie. Ali, can you wrap up in 20 seconds and then we'll come back?
Yes, of course. The British representative we're hearing from wants us to recognize an Israeli state that has no borders. Where are its borders? We don't know where its borders are. It won't declare them because what it's doing is conquering the land and it doesn't want the people. And that's why Gaza is a ghetto for unwanted Palestinians who have been ethnically cleansed from their land solely because they're not Jews. That's what Zionism is.
All right,
it's
Ali,
take the land, but not the people.
You've made that point. Let me give Robbie a chance very quickly and briefly, Robbie, so we don't get bogged down too much into this. And then I want to give Issam a chance. 20 seconds, Robbie.
The crux of the issue was what reflected. Do they recognize the Jews have a right of self-determination in Palestine? We recognize the Palestinians do. We're willing to negotiate. We've negotiated borders already with Jordan, with Egypt. We're willing to negotiate with the Palestinians. But it has to be mutual. They have to recognize that we have a right to self-determination.
Let's give Issam, let's break this up for a second, give Issam a chance. I can see, Issam, you wanted to weigh in before I move on with some other questions. Go ahead.
Your guest in Jerusalem mentioned that 90% of the Palestinians are living in areas A and B, but he didn't mention that still 61% of occupied territory is Area C, where most of the Palestinian resources are thefted, underground water, stones, everything. We don't have access to the Dead Sea. The issue here is what to negotiate about. The bottom line for us is that all the Palestinian territory in the 67 that was occupied in 67 is an occupied territory. It's illegal for Israel to stay here. If they are willing to negotiate how to withdraw from this area, but they want to, we made our historical compromise. We accepted the establishment of a Palestinian state, over 22% only of historic Palestine. This is the greatest compromise than any people in the world can do, but Israel doesn't accept us.
Let me move the discussion on, if I may. Forgive me, Issam.
Equal rights.
You've made that point,
the bottom line for us, either we have two fully equal states or one state based on equal rights. We will not accept to live as slaves in this part of the world with our water is
okay. You've made that point. It segues nicely into the point I was going to make.
There is no Palestinian.
Let's take a few seconds for me to perhaps read to everyone a quote by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He made this statement on June the 5th, 2017, saying, "Continued settlement construction and expansion and militant activity in Gaza risk creating a one-state reality that is incompatible with realizing the legitimate national and historic aspirations of both people." Robbie, if you have a situation where increasingly settlement construction means it's going to be impossible to have a sort of connected Palestinian state, doesn't that really mean you will end up in a situation where you have one choice? Either let Palestinians back from refugee camps in places like Gaza and lose the Jewish majority, or keep them as occupied second-class people?
The solution is to negotiate with a Palestinian state. Israel recognizes the Palestinian. So
I'm not asking you about the solution at this point, because I know we can have a long discussion about the solution, and the PLO have been at it with the Israelis and they haven't found one. I doubt we're going to find one in this show. But my question is more about the continued settlement expansion. Will it not? Do you agree with the UN Secretary General that continued settlement expansion is going to make it very difficult to have anything other than a one state?
The answer is a border. When there's a border, they'll be quite clear which settlements are in Israel, which are not. But for this, the Palestinians will have to sit down with us. And so long as Hamas continues to declare that Palestine is completely an Arab state, it's very difficult.
But so my question is, where will you draw a border when you have a Swiss cheese of Palestinian networks of towns and cantons? Doesn't it become impossible?
Very, very difficult.
I'll come to you in a second, Annie. Let's just give Robbie a chance to wrap up. Go ahead, Robbie.
Very difficult. It's more difficult now than it would have been if the Palestinians had sat with us 10 years ago. It'll be even more difficult in 10 years' time. The answer is sit with us, make difficult compromises. We're willing to make difficult compromises, but it must be mutual. And this is the issue. It must be mutual. You can't only demand from Israel. Palestinians will sit with us, we'll have an agreed border, and hopefully we can develop into a prosperous society, both for Palestinians and for Israelis.
All right, Ali, go ahead.
This is hilarious. I mean, it must be mutual. Israel occupies the whole of historic Palestine. As my colleague said, Palestinians said, okay, we'll accept a state on 22% of historic Palestine. And the Israeli settler state is busy gobbling up 100%. And we have this man in his lovely, soothing tone saying, oh, it must be mutual. There's no mutuality in military occupation and settler colonialism. And I mean, he keeps saying, Hamas, look.
Does he not have a point, though, Ali, when he says there has to be a recognition of Israeli rights from the other side, and sometimes there's a lack of that? That's Robbie's point.
What is the recognition he wants? He wants a Palestinian recognition for Israel to be able to steal land in the West Bank. He wants Palestinian recognition for Palestinians not to be allowed back to their homes solely because they're not Jews, a clearly racist claim that no Palestinian can accept. And he talks about Hamas this and Hamas that. Let me ask him a question. Let me ask him a question. Let me ask him a question, see if we can get a straight answer. Is it not a fact that senior ministers in the Israeli government, including Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, and I could name a whole bunch of others, don't recognize a right to a Palestinian state, and in fact say that Israel should annex most of the West Bank? Yet he makes it sound as if the intransigence is on the Palestinian side. The intransigence
Okay, let's give him a chance to answer that question, Ali.
It's the one with the power.
Okay, go ahead, Robbie.
A fair question at last. The Israeli government is willing to negotiate. The Israeli Prime Minister has been on record that he's willing to recognize Palestinian state. There are those in Israel who don't. And if there's no negotiations, the situation will get worse. The answer is sit, as Jordan did, as Egypt did, sit with us, negotiate. You'll find that Israel is willing to make compromises.
Okay, but let me jump in here, if I may, Robbie.
The Jordanians did, recognizing Israel as an independent state.
Isn't there a slight difference? The problem between the Israelis and Palestinians, of course, is a struggle for land in a different sort of way that occurred between the Jordanians and Egyptians, and a population that Israel doesn't want to either recognize as citizens, but wants the land. I mean, just to give you an example here, this is by Amnesty International in February the 14th, 2017. This is not a Palestinian organization, or an Israeli one for that matter. And they go on to say, last week, the Israeli Knesset passed a law allowing the government seizure of private Palestinian land on which settlements have been established. Now, to Ali's point, when you have a process where one party is eating the pizza, doesn't it become very difficult to talk about restoring anything? Because as time goes on, that pizza is becoming increasingly consumed.
Well, I don't think the issue is about pizza. First of all, there are 20% of the Israeli population are Arabs and they're full citizens. As to this law, what it said is where already Jews are living on land, they should be paid compensation while they're kicked out. It did not allow further appropriation of private land. It did say, and this is a problem, it happened in northern Cyprus as well, when somebody's moved in, do you kick him out or do you pay compensation to the previous owner? This is an issue other states have faced.
All right, let me take that point to Issam, because I think we've got about a minute left and I think we haven't heard as much as we would like to from Issam. Is this a similar situation of Cyprus or other states have faced? I quote the Attorney General of Israel, Avichai Mandelblit, who said that if this law is challenged in court, he won't defend against arguments that it violates the Fourth Geneva Convention. He sees it as quite a dangerous development in Israeli legal practice.
Yes, that's Israel in fact doesn't recognize the applicability of the Geneva Conventions on the occupied territory, doesn't accept the applicability of international humanitarian law, and many of its practices, especially settlement and forcible transfer of the Palestinians from Area C and from Jerusalem, all these practices are war crimes, and Israel should be accountable for that.
All right.
Your guest is asking Palestinians to negotiate. We are negotiating in the last 27 years. What we got?
It hasn't got very far. I think that's one point that most people
of settlement expansion.
Unfortunately, most people would agree on. Is that it hasn't got very far.
The Israeli housing minister, Yoav Gallant, declared that. The Israeli housing minister, Yoav Gallant, declared that they have plans in the coming 20 years to build 1 million housing units in the occupied territory. What kind of peace that we will accept?
All right,
Mr.
I'm afraid we are out of time.
Said that we will keep our control over the Jordan Valley and over Jerusalem, and we will negotiate on the rest. They can call it whatever they call it.
Let's leave it at there. I'm sorry, we are out of time. Thank you very much to all of our guests for their participation. Robbie Sabel, Issam Aruri and Ali Abu Nama. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here for now, it's goodbye.